In the twilight of her life, when most grandmothers were content with quiet retirement, Margaret Wilson walked into a Georgia foster home and made a decision that left everyone speechless. At 70 years old, she chose to adopt twin black toddlers, turning every social expectation upside down. Her own family called it a crisis of judgment. The community whispered their doubts. But what these twin boys would accomplish under her unconditional love would silence every critic and rewrite the meaning of family. This isn't just another heartwarming adoption story. This is about how a grandmother's radical act of love would transform two abandoned children into extraordinary men whose achievements would inspire a nation, proving that the greatest adventures in life don't end at retirement. Sometimes that's exactly where they begin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Margaret Wilson stood at her kitchen window, staring at the bird feeder her late husband Robert had mounted 15 years ago. The morning light caught the faded brass hook, a reminder of how time had weathered everything in her life. 2 years. After Robert's passing, the silence in her home had grown from a comfort to an ache that even her favorite cardinals' visits couldn't soothe. Her friends had tried their best to fill her days. There were the Tuesday bridge games at Helen's house, where the conversation inevitably turned to grandchildren and arthritis medications. Thursday mornings meant volunteer work at the local library, carefully replacing books on shelves while watching young mothers shepherd their children through story time. Sundays brought church services, followed by polite lunches, where widows like herself compared notes on loneliness and gathered sympathy like collected coins. She had raised 4 children in this house, each room still echoing with memories of homework discussions, teenage arguments, and family dinners. Sarah, her eldest, was now a successful attorney in Atlanta. Michael had followed his father's footsteps into medicine, practicing in Boston. James worked in finance in Chicago, and her youngest, David, taught high school mathematics in Charlotte. They called regularly, visited on holidays, and sent photos of her grandchildren, 7 in total, all growing up too fast in cities too far away. The kitchen timer chimed, pulling Margaret from her reverie. Another batch of chocolate chip cookies, destined for a church bake sale no one really needed. She pulled them from the oven with practiced care, remembering how Robert used to sneak them while they were still too hot, burning his tongue but grinning like a schoolboy. Her life had become a carefully orchestrated routine of meaningful meaninglessness. Each day was planned, each hour accounted for, yet something vital was missing. The purpose that had driven her for decades, raising children, supporting Robert's medical career, building a home, had faded into a watercolor of past achievements. That morning, while flipping through the local newspaper, her eyes caught on an advertisement she would normally have skipped past. The Georgia foster care system was facing a crisis, with a record number of children needing homes. The accompanying photo showed a group of children at a community event, their smiles masking stories Margaret could only imagine. She found herself returning to that page throughout the day, something stirring in her chest that she hadn't felt since Robert's passing. It wasn't pity. She had enough life experience to know that pity helped no one. It was something else, something that reminded her of the day she had first held Sarah nearly 45 years ago. That evening, as she prepared for another solitary dinner, Margaret caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her silver hair was neatly styled, her clothes pressed and proper, the very image of a retiring grandmother. But her eyes told a different story. They held the same spark that had convinced Robert to marry her 60 years ago, the same determination that had seen her through raising 4 children while supporting her husband's demanding career. The house phone rang. Sarah, right on schedule for her weekly check-in. They discussed the usual topics: Sarah's latest case, her children's activities, the weather in Atlanta. But when Sarah asked about her week, Margaret hesitated. How could she explain the growing certainty that she wasn't finished yet, that somewhere Between the bridge games and bake sales, she had more to give. After hanging up, Margaret sat in Robert's old armchair, feeling its familiar embrace. She could almost hear his voice, teasing her about her restlessness, encouraging her as he always had. Maggie, he would have said, using the nickname only. He was allowed to use, "When have you ever let being sensible stop you from doing what's right?" She reached for her laptop, the one her children had insisted she learn to use. Her fingers moved slowly but purposefully across the keyboard as she searched for information about foster care and adoption. The statistics made her heart ache. Thousands of children waiting for homes, siblings separated by necessity, older children and minorities facing longer waits for permanent placement. As the evening light faded, Margaret Wilson made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew her, anyone who thought they knew her. She was 70 years old, widowed, and supposedly settled into a quiet retirement. But tomorrow she would make a call that would change not only her life, but the lives of children she hadn't yet met. She slept soundly that night, more peacefully than she had in the 2 years since Robert's passing. In her dreams, she heard children's laughter echoing through her too-quiet house, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt like more than just a collection of scheduled activities and polite conversations. The Sunshine Children's Home sat on the outskirts of Atlanta, a weathered brick building that had seen too many tearful goodbyes and too few happy endings. Margaret smoothed her skirt for the third time as Miss Jenkins, the social worker, led her through fluorescent-lit hallways. The woman's skepticism was barely concealed behind her professional demeanor. Another elderly volunteer, she probably thought, looking for a way to fill empty hours. "The twins have been with us for 8 months now," Ms. Jenkins explained, flipping through their file. "Their previous foster family couldn't handle 2 toddlers. Before that, they were in 2 other homes." She paused, studying Margaret's face for any sign of wavering. "They were abandoned at the hospital shortly after birth. No information about the father and the mother." She shook her head. "Well, she never came back." They stopped outside a brightly decorated playroom. Through the window, Margaret saw 2 small boys sitting in a corner, identical down to their matching blue t-shirts. While other children scattered around the room in noisy play, the twins seemed to exist in their own world, sharing a picture. "Book between them? That's James and Michael," Miss Jenkins said softly. "James is older by 12 minutes. He's the more outgoing one, always looking out for his brother. Michael's quieter but sharp as a tack. They're both bright boys, but," she hesitated, "they don't trust easily anymore. Can't blame them, really." Margaret felt something shift in her chest as she watched them. James pointed at something in the book, and Michael's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire being. In that moment, she saw past their matching brown curls and chocolate skin to something that reminded her of her own children at that age, the pure, unguarded joy of sharing a moment with someone you trusted completely. "May I meet them?" Margaret asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The boys looked up as they entered the room, their expressions instantly guarding. James shifted slightly, positioning himself between his brother and the newcomers, a gesture that spoke volumes about their experiences. They were just 3 years old, but their eyes held a wariness that no child should know. Margaret chose to sit on the floor rather than tower over them, ignoring the protest in her joints. "Hello," she said softly. "I see you're reading Where the Wild Things Are. That was my children's favorite book when they were little." James studied her face intently. "You have kids?" he asked, his voice small but clear. "I do. They're all grown up now, with children of their own." Margaret smiled. "Would you like me to read to you?" Michael peered around his brother's shoulder, curiosity winning over caution. James looked at his twin, then back at Margaret, before slowly extending the book. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and she felt the slight tremor in his small hand. As Margaret began to read, her voice took on the familiar cadence that had soothed her own children through countless bedtime stories. She changed her voice. For different characters, just as she had done years ago, Gradually, the twins edged closer. By the time Max was sailing home to his still hot supper, Michael was leaning against her arm, and James was pointing out details in the illustrations. Over. The next 2 hours, they read 3 more books. The twins showed her their favorite toys. A worn fire truck for James, a stuffed elephant for Michael. They told her about their morning breakfast, their favorite colors, the ant they had watched in the playground. Small details, precious. Fragments of their world freely offered. Miss Jenkins watched from the doorway, her professional distance softening as she observed the interaction. The twins rarely warmed to visitors, yet here they were, gradually unfurling like morning glories in the sun. When it was time to leave, James asked the question that broke and mended Margaret's heart simultaneously. "Will you come back?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "If it's all right with Miss Jenkins, I'd like to visit you again." Michael, who had barely spoken during the visit, suddenly wrapped his arms around Margaret's legs. James joined him a moment later. The embrace lasted only seconds before they retreated, but it felt like a seal on an unspoken promise. In the parking lot, Miss Jenkins cleared her throat. "Mrs. Wilson, I have to be direct. I saw the preliminary paperwork you submitted. You're requesting information about adoption, not just visitation. I need you to understand. Taking on 2 3-year-olds at your age, it's unprecedented. The system has guidelines, protocols." Margaret turned to face the social worker, standing straight despite the emotional and physical exhaustion of the day. "Miss Jenkins, I raised 4 children. I've been a pediatric nurse, a school volunteer, and a Sunday school teacher. I have a secure home, financial stability, and more love left to give than I know what to do with. Those boys in there, they need more than guidelines and protocols. They need a family. It won't be easy," Miss Jenkins warned. "There will be challenges. Physical, emotional, cultural. The age gap alone." "Life isn't easy for anyone," Margaret replied. "But those boys deserve a chance at a real home, and I deserve a chance to give them one." Driving home that evening, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the twins' faces. She saw James's protective stance, Michael's hesitant smile, the way they unconsciously mirrored each other's movements. She thought about the stories they had shared, the laughter that had brightened their eyes, the tiny hands that had trustingly held hers. Her house, when she pulled into the driveway, looked different somehow. She saw it through new eyes. The spare bedroom that could become a nursery, the backyard perfect for a playground, the kitchen where she could teach 2 small boys to bake cookies. The silence that greeted her as she opened the door no longer felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like the pause before a symphony begins. The tension in Margaret's living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Her 4 children sat around her, their expressions ranging from concern to outright disbelief. Sarah, ever the attorney, was the first to break the stunned silence that followed Margaret's announcement. "Mum, you can't be serious," she said, her professional composure cracking. "Adopting twins, at your age and their—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Have you really thought about the cultural implications?" "I've thought about everything," Margaret replied calmly, though her hands clasped tightly in her lap betrayed her anxiety. "James and Michael need a home. I have one to give them." Michael Jr., her doctor son, leaned forward in Robert's old armchair. "Mom, I need to be blunt here. You're 70. The physical demands of raising toddlers. Have you considered the health risks, the strain on your heart, your joints? I've already scheduled a full medical evaluation," Margaret countered. "My last checkup was excellent, and I'm more active than most people my age." James, her finance-minded son, pulled out his phone and began typing. "The costs alone, private school medical care, college funds, not to mention potential therapy, cultural education programs." He looked up. "You'd be depleting your retirement savings." "Your father and I lived well below our means for 40 years, Margaret said firmly. "The house is paid for, my pension is secure, and the investments are doing well. I've done the math, James. Only David, her youngest, remained quiet, watching the exchange with thoughtful eyes that reminded her so much of Robert's. The high school teacher in him was probably seeing all sides of the equation. "They're 3 years old," Sarah pressed. "Or what happens when they're teenagers? When they need to learn about their identity, their culture, when they face discrimination? How can you possibly prepare them for that?" Margaret felt a flash of anger she rarely allowed herself to show. You think I haven't considered these things? That I'm just some naive old woman having a late-life crisis? That's exactly what this looks like, Sarah exploded, standing up. Dad's been gone 2 years, you're lonely, I understand that. But this isn't the answer. Join a book club, volunteer, at a school travel, anything but this. Sarah Elizabeth Wilson, Margaret's voice cut through the room like steel wrapped in silk. Sit down. Her daughter, despite being a successful attorney in her 40s, automatically obeyed. I am not lonely. I'm not having a crisis. I'm making a choice, a difficult, complicated, wonderful choice, to give 2 children a chance at the same kind of loving home I gave all of you. But they're not, Sarah began. If you finish that sentence, David finally spoke, his quiet voice carrying unexpected weight. You'll regret it for the rest of your life. The room fell silent. David stood and crossed to sit beside his mother. I teach kids like James and Michael every day. Know what they need most? Not money, not cultural programs, though those things matter. They need love, stability, and someone who believes in them completely. He took Margaret's hand. Mom raised us while working night shifts as a nurse and supporting Dad through his residency. I'd say those boys are about to hit the lottery. Tears pricked at Margaret's eyes, but she blinked them back. I'm not asking for your permission, she said gently. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Those boys need a mother. I need them just as much. You can either support us and be part of their lives, or you can miss out on something extraordinary. Michael Jr. rubbed his face tiredly. Mom, you know it's not that we don't care about these kids. We're worried about you. I know, Margaret smiled. You get that from me, but sometimes the riskiest choices are the ones most worth making. The family meeting ended without resolution, the fractures clearly visible in their goodbyes. Sarah left without hugging her mother for the first time in memory. James and Michael Jr. departed with worried frowns and promises to discuss this more later. Only David lingered. They'll come around, he said, helping her collect the untouched coffee cups. Sarah especially, she just needs time to process. You know how she gets when she can't control a situation. Margaret looked at her youngest, seeing the wisdom that made him such a good teacher. Thank you for understanding. I don't understand completely, he admitted, but I trust you, and I can't wait to meet my new brothers. After David left, Margaret sat in her quiet house, feeling the weight of the day settle around her. The family's reaction had been exactly what she'd expected, and yet it still hurt. But when she closed her eyes, she saw James and Michael's faces, felt their small arms around her legs, heard their laughter over shared stories. Some fractures, she knew, had to happen before something stronger could be built in their place. The adoption application process felt like climbing a mountain that grew taller with each step. Margaret's kitchen table disappeared under stacks of paperwork. Background checks, financial statements, medical evaluations, home study forms. Each document reminded her that she wasn't the typical adoptive parent the system was designed for. Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Patterson said during her mandatory physical, peering at her over his reading glasses, I've been your doctor for 20 years. You're in remarkable shape for your age, but raising twins... He shook his head while writing in her chart. The physical demands alone. Just write your honest evaluation, Thomas, Margaret replied, using his first name. She'd been his children's pediatric nurse after all. That's all I'm asking for. He signed the form with a mixture of resignation and respect. Your heart's stronger than most 40-year-olds I see. I just hope you know what you're getting into. The home study was next. Ms. Jenkins walked through every room, noting details in her ever-present notebook. She examined the planned bedroom for the twins, the carefully installed safety locks, the new child-sized furniture Margaret had optimistically purchased. "The physical setup is perfect," Miss Jenkins admitted, "but I have to ask about your support system, your children's reactions." "My son David is fully supportive," Margaret interjected, "and the others will come around. I also have my church, community, my neighbors, and a lifetime of experience raising children." The questions kept coming. How would she handle racial discrimination? What were her plans for cultural education? How would she manage doctor's appointments, school events, daily activities? Margaret answered each one with carefully thought-out plans, backed by research she'd done late into the night on her laptop. The neighborhood gossip spread quickly. Margaret overheard whispers at her usual bridge game. At her age, taking on black twins, must be losing her mind after Robert. Those poor children. She stopped attending bridge. Instead, she used Tuesday afternoons to take cultural sensitivity courses at the local community center. The instructor, a young black woman named Keisha, became an unexpected ally. "Most people wouldn't bother," Keisha said after one session. "They'd just wing it. The fact that you're here, learning, preparing, that says everything about the kind of mother you'll be." The adoption panel interview was the final hurdle. 7 stern faces studied her as she sat before them, her spine straight despite her nervousness. The questions were brutal in their directness. "Mrs. Wilson, what makes you think you can handle 2 traumatized toddlers at your age? How do you plan to address racial identity issues? What happens to these children if your health fails?" Margaret took a deep breath, thinking of James's protective stance over his brother, of Michael's shy smile. "I'm not here to prove I'm the perfect candidate," she said. "I'm here because 2 little boys need a home, and I have love, experience, and resources to give them one. I've raised 4 children while working nights as a nurse. I've navigated the healthcare system, the education system, and every childhood crisis imaginable. Yes, I'm 70. That means I have 70 years of problem-solving experience." She pulled out a folder. "I have detailed plans for every concern you've raised. A college fund is already set up. My son David has agreed to be their guardian if anything happens to me. I'm taking courses on cultural sensitivity and racial identity. I've researched schools, therapists, and support groups, but most importantly, I've met James and Michael. I've seen their potential, their resilience, and their need for stability. They deserve a chance at a real family, and I deserve a chance to give them one." The panel deliberated for what felt like hours. When they called her back in, the chairwoman's face was unreadable. "Mrs. Wilson, your application is unprecedented. We've never approved an adoption for someone your age, let alone for twins." She paused, shuffling papers. "However, your preparation is extraordinary, your qualifications are impressive, and your home study results are excellent. More importantly, the twins' response to you during supervised visits has been remarkable." Margaret held her breath. "We're approving the adoption, conditionally. There will be monthly check-ins for the first year, and you'll need to demonstrate ongoing compliance with all support programs we've discussed." Later that night, Margaret sat in her garden, looking at the stars Robert had taught their children to name. She could almost hear his laugh, see his proud smile. "Well done, Maggie." His voice seemed to whisper on the evening breeze. "Well done!" Tomorrow, she would begin transforming the spare room into a bedroom for her sons. Her sons. The thought made her heart swell. Against all odds, her family was about to grow in the most unexpected and wonderful way. The morning Margaret brought the twins home was bright with early summer sunshine. She'd been up since dawn, double-checking every detail of their room, the twin beds with matching rocket ship comforters, the carefully arranged stuffed animals, the nightlight that cast gentle stars across the ceiling. David had come over early to help, bringing a handmade welcome sign he'd created with his art students. "Ready for this, Mom?" he asked, watching her adjust the curtains for the 3rd time. Before she could answer, Miss Jenkins's car pulled into the driveway. Margaret's heart leaped as she saw two small faces pressed against the back window. This was it. The moment her house would become their home. James held Michael's hand as they walked up the path, their few belongings in small backpacks decorated with superhero logos. They stopped at the front door, looking up at Margaret with a mixture of hope and uncertainty that made her throat tight with emotion. "Welcome home, boys," she said softly, kneeling down to their level despite her protesting knees. "Would you like to see your room?" Michael clutched his stuffed elephant tighter, but James's face lit up at the word "your." They followed her upstairs, David trailing behind with their social worker. When Margaret opened the bedroom door, both boys froze in amazement. "Is this all for us?" James whispered, staring at the toys, books, and carefully arranged furniture. "All for you," Margaret confirmed. "You each have your own bed, your own space, but you can always be together if you want to be." Michael suddenly darted to one of the beds, climbing up and bouncing experimentally. A tiny giggle escaped him, the first Margaret had heard from the quieter twin. James joined his brother seconds later, their shared joy filling the room with a sound Margaret had missed more than she'd realized. The first days were a delicate dance of establishing routines while respecting the twins' need to adjust. Margaret learned quickly that each boy had his own way of dealing with the change. James explored every inch of the house, asking endless questions, while Michael preferred to observe from what he deemed safe spaces, usually corners with clear views of exits. Bedtime proved challenging from the start. The first night, both boys ended up in the same bed, clutching each other through tears they tried to hide. Margaret sat in the rocking chair beside them, singing soft lullabies until their breathing steadied. "What if you go away?" James asked on the third night, his small voice heavy with old fears. "I'm not going anywhere," Margaret promised, smoothing his curls. "This is your forever home now. We're a family." Meals became a time of discovery. Margaret learned that Michael would try any vegetable if it was arranged in a smiley face on his plate, while James approached new foods with diplomatic caution, requiring detailed explanations of what he was eating. She started involving them in simple cooking tasks, stirring batter, sprinkling cheese, arranging fruit into shapes. Their pride in helping made every meal more special. Cultural integration began naturally. Margaret hung beautiful African art in the living room, filled their bookshelves with diverse stories, and played music from various traditions. Keisha from the community center became a regular visitor, bringing cultural insights and becoming something of an aunt figure to the boys. The challenges were real, but manageable. Margaret found herself more tired than she'd been in years, but it was a good kind of tired. She developed new strategies for conserving energy, sitting on the floor during playtime instead of getting up and down, teaching the boys to help with simple chores, accepting David's regular offers of assistance. Physical affection evolved. Gradually, while James was quick to give hugs, Michael took weeks to initiate contact. The first time he crawled into Margaret's lap during story time, she had to pause reading to blink back tears. By the end of the first month, both boys were comfortable with goodnight kisses and morning cuddles. Language shifted too. They started calling her Mama Margaret, a compromise suggested by Keisha that acknowledged both their new relationship and their heritage. Margaret treasured the way they said it, how it evolved from tentative whispers to confident declarations. The house transformed with their presence. Toys migrated from the bedroom to various corners. Artwork appeared on the refrigerator. The backyard, once Margaret's quiet garden sanctuary, now featured a small playground David had helped install. The silence that had once haunted the rooms was replaced by pattering feet, occasional crashes, spontaneous giggles, and the thousand small sounds of childhood. One evening, as Margaret watched the twins playing with their blocks in the living room, she noticed something remarkable. They were building separate structures, but unconsciously passing each other exactly the pieces they needed, moving in a harmony developed through years of being each other's only constant. Now, though, They were expanding their circle of trust to include her. "Mama Margaret, look!" James called, proudly displaying his tower. "It's taller than Michael's, but mine has a door." Michael countered quietly, demonstrating how his creation could actually open. "They're both wonderful," Margaret said, "just like you are." The boys beamed at her, their smiles holding none of the guardedness they'd shown 6 weeks ago. In that moment, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that every form she'd filled out, every hurdle she'd overcome, every whispered doubt she'd ignored, it had all been worth it. This was exactly where she was meant to be. 6 months into their new life together, Margaret sat in her doctor's office, trying to ignore the twinge in her lower back. The twins' latest growth spurt meant more lifting, more chasing, more physical demands than she'd anticipated. Dr. Patterson studied her latest test results with a frown. "Your blood pressure's elevated, Margaret. Not dangerously, but it's higher than I'd like to see." He set down the chart. "How are you really doing?" Before she could answer, her phone chimed with a text from David, who was watching the boys. "Michael had a nightmare, asking for you. He's calm now, but thought you should know." The nightmares had started 3 weeks ago. They would wake to Michael's muffled sobs, finding him curled into a tight ball, reliving memories his 3-year-old mind couldn't fully process. James would already be there, patting his twin's back, whispering, "We're home now, Michael, we're home." "I'm tired," Margaret admitted to Dr. Patterson. "But I've been tired before. When Robert was doing his residency and I was working night shifts with 4 kids under 10, that was tired. This is different. This is necessary tired." The physical challenges were just one aspect of their growing pains. The first time they'd encountered overt racism had been at the grocery store, of all places. An elderly shopper had stared at their family, then loudly asked her companion, "What is that white woman doing with those children?" James had gripped Margaret's hand tighter, while Michael pressed himself against her legs. Margaret had been prepared for such moments. Keisha's classes had covered this, but the reality still stung. She'd straightened her spine, looked the woman in the eye, and said clearly, "I'm shopping with my sons. Have a blessed day." Later, in the car, she'd had to explain concepts to her children that no 3-year-old should have to understand. That evening, she'd called Keisha in tears. "How do I protect them from this? How do I make it hurt less?" "You can't," Keisha had answered honestly, "but you can build them up so strong that other people's ignorance bounces off. And you're already doing that, Margaret. I see it every time they come to the community center." The twins were indeed growing stronger, more confident. James had become the unofficial welcomer at their daycare, greeting new children and showing them around. Michael, while still quiet, had discovered a talent for puzzles that amazed his teachers. Both boys were learning to write their names, though Michael insisted on practicing only with blue crayons, while James would use every color available. Their personalities continued to emerge and develop. James was the storyteller, spinning tales about their stuffed animals' secret adventures. Michael was the observer, noticing details others missed, like how the morning light made patterns on their bedroom wall, or how their neighbor's cat always sat in the same spot at the same time each day. Physical changes were evident too. They'd both grown 2 inches, their baby faces lengthening, their movements becoming more coordinated. Margaret documented everything in the journals she kept for each of them, adding photos, notes about their achievements, and pressed flowers from their adventures in the garden. But it wasn't all progress. Some days, old traumas surfaced unexpectedly. A dropped plate could trigger Michael's anxiety. A visitor leaving could send James into a clingy panic. Margaret learned to navigate these moments with patience, holding space for their feelings while gently reinforcing their security. Her own body sometimes betrayed her intentions. One afternoon, trying to catch Michael as he ran toward the street, she'd moved too quickly and thrown out her back. The incident had scared all of them. The twins, because they'd never seen her vulnerable, and Margaret because it highlighted her physical limitations. David had been invaluable during her recovery, staying with them for a week. He'd helped with baths and bedtime, taught the boys gentle ways to cuddle with their mama, and shown them how they could help with simple tasks. It was during this time that Sarah had finally visited, arriving unannounced with a casserole and uncertain eyes. She'd watched the twins help David set the table, listened to them chatter about their day, observed how they naturally included Margaret in their play, even while she was restricted to the couch. Something in her expression had shifted, softened. "They really love you," she'd said quietly to Margaret, "and you're exactly what they needed." It wasn't a full acceptance yet, but it was a start. Meanwhile, James and Michael Jr. had begun sending regular care packages, books, educational toys, and even a tablet loaded with learning games. Their wives had started following Margaret's private photo blog, where she documented the twins' progress. The community's attitude was shifting too. Their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had appointed herself honorary grandmother, regularly appearing with homemade dumplings and stories about her own childhood in Taiwan. The church ladies who had initially whispered now competed to have the twins in their Sunday school classes. Margaret's house had evolved to match their needs. The living room now featured a soft play area with tumbling mats. The kitchen included a learning tower where the boys could safely help with cooking. The garden boasted a vegetable patch where each twin had their own section to tend. Yet the most significant changes were the invisible ones, the way the twins now reached for her automatically when they were tired or scared, how they developed. Inside jokes and secret languages, the trust in their eyes when she promised something, the way Mama Margaret had shortened naturally to just Mama one ordinary Tuesday morning. That evening, after texting David that all was well, Margaret sat between the twins' beds during story time. Michael was already half asleep, his stuffed elephant tucked under his chin. James was fighting to keep his eyes open, determined to hear the end of the story. Her back ached, her blood pressure needed watching, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But as she looked at her sons, her beautiful, brilliant, growing sons, she knew that every pain was worth it. They were all growing together, learning to be the family they needed to be. "Mama," James murmured sleepily, "are you happy we're your boys?" "More than anything in the world," Margaret answered, her heart full. "Good," Michael whispered from his bed, "'cause we're happy you're our." "Mama." Some growing pains, Margaret realized, were actually growing joys in disguise. The prospect of preschool loomed like a mountain on Margaret's calendar. She'd spent weeks researching options before choosing Little Learners Academy, attracted by their diverse staff and emphasis on cultural inclusion. Still, watching the twins try on their new backpacks, dinosaurs for James, space rockets for Michael, she felt the weight of this transition. "Remember what we practiced?" she asked as they stood before the mirror. The boys nodded solemnly. "I'm James Wilson, I'm 4, and I love stories," James recited proudly. "I'm Michael Wilson, I'm 4, and I like puzzles," Michael added softly, adjusting his backpack straps. The Wilson part was new. The adoption had been finalized 2 months ago, marked by a celebration that brought the entire family together for the first time since Margaret's announcement. Even Sarah had come, bringing a cake and tentative smiles. The boys had been practicing their new full names ever since, rolling the syllables around like candy. Their first day of preschool revealed the stark differences in their personalities. James immediately joined a group building with blocks, while Michael lingered near the teacher, Miss Rodriguez, until she gently guided him toward the reading corner. Margaret watched through the observation window, her heart doing somersaults, until David, who'd taken the morning off to support them, pulled her away. "They'll be fine, Mom," he assured her. "Miss Rodriguez has 20 years of experience." But it was more than just separation anxiety. Margaret worried about the questions they might face, the explanations they'd have to give about their unique family. She'd prepared them as best she could, but 4-year-olds could be brutally honest in their curiosity. Her fears weren't unfounded, but the challenges came in unexpected ways. During the second week, a parent complained about James being too bossy with her daughter. Ms. Rodriguez handled it beautifully, explaining that James showed natural leadership skills and was actually helping other children feel included. Michael faced different challenges. His quiet nature was sometimes mistaken for aloofness until Ms. Rodriguez discovered his gift for mathematics. She found him helping another student with counting during snack time, arranging apple slices into perfect groups of 5. The preschool experience brought new routines into their lives. Morning rushes to get dressed and fed, afternoon story, circles where each child shared their day's adventures, and the gradual formation of friendships that led to playdate invitations. Margaret adapted too. She learned to pack lunches that were both nutritious and trade-worthy. James was a master lunch negotiator, figured out how to style the boys' hair in ways that stayed neat all day, thanks to YouTube tutorials and lots of practice, and mastered the art of quick outfit changes when morning juice spills threatened their schedule. The family dynamic continued evolving. Sarah started visiting more regularly, usually bringing her own children for cousin playdates. The first time James called her Aunt Sarah, her composure cracked, and she had to excuse herself to cry in the bathroom. Michael Jr. and his wife FaceTimed weekly, their medical expertise proving invaluable when the twins caught their first preschool cold. One Sunday after church, Margaret overheard Mrs. Chen telling her garden club friends, "Those boys are the best thing that ever happened to our neighborhood." She noticed how no one disagreed, how the initial skepticism had been replaced by genuine affection for her unconventional family. The true testament to their progress came during the preschool's grandparents' day. Margaret sat in the tiny chair, between her sons, helping them with their art project, when Michael suddenly announced to the room, "My mama is the best mama and the best grandma all in one." James nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, she can do everything. She makes the best cookies, and she can catch frogs, and she knows all the dinosaur names." The other grandparents chuckled, but Margaret caught Ms. Rodriguez wiping away a tear. Later, the teacher pulled her aside. "You know, we were all a bit worried at first. The age difference, the cultural gap, but watching you with them, you've created something magical here." That evening, as Margaret tucked the boys into bed, she reflected on how far they'd come. The nightmares were rare now, replaced by excited chatter about school adventures. The tentative Mama Margaret had evolved into confident Mama shouts across playgrounds. Their family photo wall showed the progression. Awkward early poses, giving way to natural smiles, genuine laughter, spontaneous hugs. "Mama," Michael called sleepily, "can you tell the story about how we became a family?" It was their favorite bedtime story now, the tale of how love could build bridges across generations, races, and circumstances. As Margaret began the familiar narrative, she marveled at how their first year together had transformed not just the twins, but everyone around them. They were no longer an experiment in unconventional family making. They were simply family. The transformation of Sarah from skeptic to advocate happened so gradually that Margaret almost missed it. It began with small things. Sarah calling to ask about the twins' favorite colors before buying their Christmas presents, sending articles about multicultural education, offering to babysit when Margaret had doctor's appointments. The real breakthrough came during an unseasonably warm spring afternoon. Sarah had brought her kids over for their now regular Sunday visit, and the cousins were playing in the backyard. Margaret was preparing lunch when she overheard Sarah defending their family to another mother at the park next door. "Yes, that's my mother with her sons, my brothers," Sarah's voice carried clearly, "and they're the best thing that's happened to our family in years. Do you have a problem with that?" That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah lingered over coffee with Margaret in the kitchen. "I was wrong, Mom," she said quietly. "I was so focused on the potential problems that I couldn't see the miracle right in front of me. The way they look at you, it's the same way I looked at you when I was little." Michael Jr. and James's transformations were equally profound. The doctor and the financier began collaborating on a foundation to support older adoptive parents, inspired by their mother's journey. Their professional networks opened doors for research into the benefits of intergenerational adoption, with Margaret and the twins as the prime example. The community center where Margaret had taken cultural sensitivity classes became a second home. Keisha started a support group for non-traditional families, with Margaret as a founding member. The twins thrived in the diverse environment, soaking up cultural knowledge while forming friendships with children from all backgrounds. "You're building bridges," Keisha told Margaret during one session, "not just for your family, but for every family that doesn't fit the conventional mold." Even the church ladies, who had once whispered behind their hands, now competed to have the twins in their Sunday school classes. Mrs. Peterson, the most vocal initial critic, became their fiercest defender. "Just look at how polite they are," she'd boast to visitors. "And so smart. Did you know Michael can already read at a first-grade level?" The boys themselves seemed to sense the bridges being built around them. They moved with increasing confidence between their various communities: preschool, church, community center, family gatherings. James, ever the diplomat, had a gift for making people feel included. Michael's quiet intelligence drew others to him naturally. David, who had supported them from the start, found his role evolving too. The boys adored their teacher brother, but more than that, they saw in him a model for their own future. "I want to help people learn, like Uncle David," James announced one day. Michael nodded in agreement, adding, "And be kind like him too." Margaret watched these connections strengthen and multiply, like roots growing deeper and wider. Each relationship enriched their lives in unique ways. Sarah's children treated the twins like they'd always been part of the family. Michael Jr.'s medical expertise provided peace of mind during health concerns. James's financial acumen ensured the boys' future security. But perhaps the most beautiful bridges were the invisible ones, the understanding that passed between family members. Without words, the way Sarah now automatically reached to help Michael with his shoes, or how James's wife knew exactly how to calm one of James's rare tantrums. The silent nod between Michael Jr. and Margaret when one of the twins achieved a new milestone. These were the bridges that transformed their unusual beginning into something natural and right. They weren't just adapting to each other anymore. They were growing together, creating a new pattern of family that was uniquely their own. One evening, as Margaret watched her entire family gathered for the twins' 5th birthday party, she saw the bridges everywhere, in the way her grandchildren played without seeing color differences, in how her adult children moved seamlessly between helping with cake and answering the twins' endless questions. In the proud smiles of their extended community family, the twins, comfortable in the center of all this love, embodied the success of these bridges. They were growing into confident, caring boys who moved easily between worlds, unafraid of differences, quick to include others. They were living proof that love could build bridges strong enough to carry any weight, span any distance. "Mama," Michael tugged at her sleeve, breaking her reverie. "Can we show everyone our new puzzle? The big one? The 1,000-piece one?" James added excitedly. "We did it all by ourselves." Margaret smiled, seeing Sarah already moving to help them retrieve it. David clearing space on the table, and the rest of the family gathering around with genuine interest. This was what bridge building looked like. Not grand gestures, but small moments of connection, understanding, and shared joy. The transition from preschool to elementary school brought new challenges that tested Margaret's resourcefulness. While both boys were bright, their learning styles couldn't have been more different. The first parent-teacher conference at Oak Grove Elementary made this crystal clear. James learns through interaction, Mrs. Thompson explained, spreading out samples of his work. He absorbs information best when he can discuss it, act it out, make it into a story. His verbal skills are exceptional for his age. Margaret nodded, remembering how James had spent the previous week turning their grocery shopping into an epic adventure, complete with different voices for each vegetable they encountered. Michael, on the other hand, Mrs. Thompson continued, turning to his portfolio, is our little scientist. He observes, analyzes, and often sees patterns that surprise even me. But he struggles with group activities and rarely raises his hand. In class, the challenge became finding ways to support each twin's learning style while ensuring neither felt less valued. Margaret transformed their after-school routine into a blend of activities that played to both their strengths. Science experiments in the kitchen satisfied Michael's analytical mind, while James turned the results into entertaining presentations for the family. David proved invaluable in developing these strategies. His experience as a high school teacher gave him insight into learning differences. They're not ahead or behind each other, he explained to Margaret. They're just taking different paths to the same destination. The breakthrough with Michael came during a parent observation day. Margaret watched from the back of the classroom as the children worked on basic addition. Michael finished his worksheet quickly, then quietly began helping the girl next to him. He didn't explain the problems. Instead, he used small drawings to show how the numbers worked together. He has a gift for visual learning, the school's educational specialist later explained. And more importantly, he has an instinctive understanding of how to share that gift with others. James's talents emerged differently. During the school's multicultural fair, he captivated a group of parents and students with stories about their unique family. "My mama is the best because she chose us," he declared proudly, "and she learns all about our culture and teaches us about love being stronger than anything." The school's diversity coordinator recorded his impromptu speech, using it as an example of how children could be natural ambassadors for inclusion and understanding. However, challenges remained. Michael's reluctance to speak up in class concerned his teachers, while James's enthusiasm sometimes disrupted lessons. Margaret worked closely with the school, implementing strategies like a signal system for Michael to show he needed help, and special projects to channel James's energy productively. One evening, while helping with homework, Margaret found herself struggling to explain a math concept to James. Michael, who had finished his own work, quietly pulled out his crayons and drew a simple diagram that made his brother's eyes light up with understanding. "See?" Michael said softly. "It's like building with blocks. You just need to see the pieces." James hugged his brother impulsively. "You're the smartest, Michael. Can you draw more?" That moment sparked an idea. Margaret began encouraging the twins to teach each other, playing to their complementary strengths. James helped Michael practice class presentations, while Michael turned James's reading assignments into visual puzzles they could solve together. The approach worked better than anyone expected. By the end of their first semester, both boys were thriving. Michael's teacher reported more participation in class, while James had learned to channel his storytelling into creative writing projects that impressed the school librarian. Margaret documented their progress meticulously, sharing insights with other parents facing similar challenges. Her experience as both a mother and grandmother gave her a unique perspective that the school began to value. She was invited to join the Parent Advisory Committee, where she advocated for more diverse teaching methods. "Every child learns differently," she told the committee. "Our job is to help them discover how they learn best, then give them the tools to soar." The twins' success began attracting attention beyond the school. Their story of academic achievement, despite early challenges, became part of a larger narrative about the potential of non-traditional families. Local educational conferences invited Margaret to speak about her experience raising gifted children later in life. But for Margaret, the real triumph was in the small moments. Michael voluntarily joining the science club, James being chosen to represent his class at school assemblies, both boys rushing home to share their daily discoveries. They were growing not just academically, but as individuals who understood and valued their own and each other's unique gifts. One afternoon, she overheard Michael explaining to a new classmate, "My mama says everybody's brain works special. You just have to find your way of being smart." James, building a fort nearby, chimed in, "Yeah, like Michael's smart with numbers and drawings, and I'm smart with stories and people." Margaret smiled, recognizing in their words the seeds of self-awareness and confidence that would serve them well in the years ahead. They were learning the most important lesson of all, that different didn't mean better or worse, it just meant different. The day everything changed started like any other. Margaret was preparing breakfast, listening to the twins chat about their upcoming school science fair, when the dizziness hit. The room tilted sideways, the ceiling and floor trading places. In a sickening spin, she grabbed the counter, but her arm felt strangely weak, uncooperative. "Mama?" James's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mama, what's wrong?" Michael, ever observant, was already reaching for the emergency phone they'd practiced with. His small fingers trembled, but found the right button, the one Margaret had programmed to call Sarah, who lived closest. "Aunt Sarah? Mama's sick," he said clearly, just as they'd rehearsed, though they'd hoped never to need it. "She's holding the counter and her face looks funny." James had positioned himself next to Margaret, his small body trying to support her much larger frame. "Sit down, Mama," he kept saying, using the firm voice she used when he was upset. "Please sit down." The ambulance arrived minutes after Sarah, its sirens splitting the quiet morning. Margaret was aware enough to hear the twins' frightened whimpers, to feel their reluctance to let go of her hands as the paramedics moved in. Sarah gathered them close, her lawyer's composure cracking as she watched her mother being loaded onto a stretcher. "BP's elevated possible stroke," one paramedic reported into his radio. "Patient is 73, guardian of 2 minor children." The hospital waiting room filled quickly with family. Michael Jr. flew in from Boston, his medical expertise both a blessing and a curse as he peppered the doctors with questions. James arrived from Chicago, immediately taking charge of insurance details and paperwork. David left his classroom mid-lesson, showing up with a bag full of the twins' favorite books and toys. But it was Sarah who surprised everyone. She took command of the situation with unexpected gentleness, setting up a schedule to ensure the twins were never alone, coordinating with their school and keeping them involved in their mother's care as much as appropriate. "Remember how Mama always says, knowledge is power," she told them, kneeling to their level outside the ICU. "The doctors found a small blood clot in Mama's brain. They're giving her medicine to help, and she needs lots of rest to get better." "But she will get better?" Michael asked, his voice small but steady. "We're doing everything we can," Sarah answered honestly, just as Margaret would have wanted. "And you know how strong Mama is." James nodded firmly. "She's the strongest. She lifted my whole dresser when my toy went under it." The twins proved remarkably resilient, but their anxiety manifested in different ways. James became extra helpful, almost manic in his desire to take care of everyone. He made sure Michael ate, reminded adults about medication times, and appointed himself official family storyteller, a role Margaret usually filled. Michael grew quieter than usual, spending hours drawing pictures for Margaret's hospital room. His artwork captured their family's journey. Margaret reading to them, teaching them to bake cookies, bandaging scraped knees. Each picture was labeled meticulously: family movie night, first day of school, making Christmas cookies. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The clot had been caught early, thanks to Michael's quick action with the emergency phone. Margaret's overall good health improved her chances for recovery, but the road ahead would be challenging. Physical therapy, speech therapy, lifestyle changes. Sarah took family medical leave from her law firm, moving temporarily into Margaret's house with her children. The twins' routine stayed as normal as possible. School, activities, meals at regular times, but everyone could see how they watched the door, hoping each person who entered would be Margaret coming home. Late one night, about a week after the incident, Sarah found them curled together in Margaret's bed, clutching her robe. Instead of sending them back to their room, she crawled in beside them, inhaling the familiar scent of her mother's lavender fabric softener. "What if she forgets us?" Michael whispered into the darkness. "Or what if she can't be our mama anymore?" James added, his voice cracking. Sarah pulled them closer, feeling the weight of their fears, their need for reassurance. "Listen to me, both of you. Mama chose you. She fought for you. That kind of love doesn't just go away, not even with a blood clot. And you have all of us now. Me, Uncle Michael, Uncle James, Uncle David. We're family, but we need her." Michael said simply, "I know," Sarah replied, her throat tight. "I need her too." Margaret's first words after the stroke were, "My boys." The speech therapist had been working with her on simple sounds, but she pushed through 3 days of frustration to form those specific words. Sarah, who had been keeping a constant vigil, immediately FaceTimed the twins at home. "James, Michael," Margaret said slowly, carefully, her face lighting up at the sight of them on the screen. The twins burst into tears of joy, and soon everyone in the room was wiping their eyes. Recovery became a family mission. Michael Jr. used his medical connections to get Margaret into an advanced rehabilitation program. James restructured his work schedule to handle the insurance and financial details remotely. David took a semester's leave to help Sarah with the twins and household management, but it was the twins themselves who proved to be Margaret's most motivated rehabilitation partners. They turned her therapy exercises into games, created flash cards for her speech practice, and celebrated every milestone with handmade certificates and ceremonies. "Look, Mama!" James would exclaim during their daily hospital visits. "Michael made a chart for your walking practice. Every lap around the nurse's station gets a star." Michael had indeed created an elaborate progress tracking system, complete with colorful rewards and encouraging messages. The hospital staff was so impressed that they began using his design with other patients. Sarah watched all of this with growing amazement. The boys she had once worried wouldn't fit into their family had become its heart. Their resilience and creativity in the face of crisis reminded her startlingly of their mother, of her mother. The community rallied around them too. Mrs. Chen kept their freezer stocked with meals. The church ladies organized a prayer circle and cleaning schedule. Keisha from the community center arranged for cultural activities to continue at home, understanding the twins needed these connections more than ever. Margaret's recovery progressed steadily. Her determination, coupled with the concentrated love and support of her family, helped her exceed her doctor's expectations. Within 2 months, she was well enough to return home, though she would need continued therapy and assistance. The homecoming required adjustments. Sarah officially moved in as a co-guardian, her law firm surprisingly supportive of her reduced schedule. The twins adapted to new routines, proud to help with simple tasks that made them feel grown up and needed. "Mama," Michael said one evening, helping to sort her medications into the weekly organizer, "I'm going to be a doctor like Uncle Michael. Then I can take care of you forever. And I'll tell everyone about how strong you are," James added, arranging her therapy equipment. "Like how you fought to come back to us because you love us so much." Margaret, her speech improving daily, pulled them close. "You two helped me fight," she said carefully. "My brave, beautiful boys." The crisis had transformed their family in unexpected ways. Sarah found herself looking forward to their new shared life, enjoying moments she would have missed otherwise. The twins flourished under the expanded family involvement, gaining confidence from their role in Margaret's recovery. Even Margaret's adult children discovered new aspects of themselves. Michael Jr. learned to balance medical knowledge with emotional support. James found that financial planning could be an act of love. David's teaching skills proved invaluable in helping everyone adjust to new normals. The experience also deepened the twins' bond with their older siblings. They began seeing their aunts and uncles not just as extended family, but as integral and parts of their support system. The age and racial differences that had once seemed so prominent faded further into irrelevance. One afternoon, as Margaret rested in her favorite armchair, she watched her entire family moving around her home with the ease of people who belonged there. Sarah and the twins were baking cookies, flour dusting their laughing faces. David was setting up new adaptive equipment while consulting with Michael Jr. via video chat. James's wife was organizing a schedule of future family visits. The stroke had terrified them all, but it had also shown them the strength of the bonds they'd built. They weren't just making it work anymore, they were thriving together, each person's unique gifts contributing to their collective resilience. "We did good, Mama," Sarah said softly, bringing her a cookie still warm from the oven. "Really good," Margaret smiled, her heart full as she watched her twins demonstrate their cookie decorating technique to their cousins. "No," she replied, her speech clear and strong in this moment of joy. "We did extraordinary." The sound of classical piano drifted through Margaret's house, now a familiar backdrop to their daily life. At 13, James had developed into a musical prodigy, his fingers dancing across the keys with a maturity that belied his age. In the study next door, Michael sat surrounded by scientific journals, his latest research project on sustainable energy spread across the desk. Margaret, now 83 but still sharp as ever, marveled at how their early personalities had blossomed into such distinct talents. The stroke had left her with a slight limp and occasional word-finding difficulties, but it hadn't diminished her ability to nurture her son's gifts. "Mama," James called out, pausing his practice. "Listen to this part. I changed the arrangement for the spring recital." His fingers returned to the keys, transforming a traditional classical piece into something uniquely his own. The music carried hints of gospel and jazz, reflecting the diverse musical education he'd received through both his classical training and their church's music program. The local press had already taken notice of James's talent. "Teen piano prodigy breaks barriers," one headline read, featuring a photo of James performing at the state music competition. But what made Margaret proudest wasn't the trophies lining his room. It was how he used his music to connect with others, volunteering to teach piano to underprivileged children and playing at local retirement homes. Michael's achievements took a different form. His quiet intensity had found its perfect outlet in scientific research. The garage had been converted into a makeshift laboratory where he conducted experiments in renewable energy, his work already catching the attention of national science competitions. "The solar panel design is almost ready," Michael announced. During dinner, his eyes bright with excitement. "If it works, it could help provide affordable power to communities like the one our birth mother came from." This was new. The twins had recently begun exploring their origins, not to find their birth mother, but to understand and honor that part of their heritage. Margaret had supported this journey, helping them research their background while reinforcing that family was built on love rather than blood. Their achievements extended beyond their individual talents. Together, they'd started a mentorship program at their school, helping other students from non-traditional families navigate challenges and celebrate their unique situations. The program had grown to include several local schools, with the twins sharing their story at educational conferences. Margaret's role had evolved too. While she couldn't attend every event or competition due to her physical limitations, she remained their strongest advocate and emotional anchor. Sarah, who now lived next door, helped manage their increasingly busy schedules, while the rest of the family pitched in with transportation, coaching, and support. One evening, as the family gathered to celebrate James's latest musical competition, Wynne and Michael's science fair victory, Margaret watched her sons interact with their siblings, nieces, and nephews. James was teaching his young cousins a simple piano piece, while Michael explained his solar panel design to an fascinated Uncle Michael Jr. The boys had grown into teenagers who defied every skeptical prediction from 9 years ago. They were confident without being arrogant, ambitious while remaining grounded, and most importantly, secure in both their identity and their place within their unusual family. "You know," Sarah remarked, helping Margaret prepare dessert, "when you first told us about adopting them, I thought you were going to ruin your retirement. Instead, you gave all of us a gift we never knew we needed." Margaret smiled, watching her sons, her beautiful, brilliant sons, sharing their passions with their family. They weren't just achieving their own dreams. They were inspiring others to dream bigger, to look past conventions and see the extraordinary possibilities that love could create. The piano music swelled again as James returned to his practice, while Michael sketched new solar panel configurations. Two different paths, one remarkable journey, and a family that had grown strong enough to support every step along the way. The conversation Margaret had been preparing for since the adoption finally happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. James stormed into the house, his usually cheerful face tight with anger, Michael right behind him with a similar expression of hurt and frustration. "They said we're not really brothers," James burst out, hands clenched. "Some kids at the mall. They said we can't be real brothers because we're adopted, and we can't be your real sons because—" His voice cracked. "Because you're white, and we're black," Michael finished quietly, his scientific precision extending even to this painful moment. Margaret set aside her book, patting the couch on either side of her. At 13, the twins were already taller than she was, but they still curled up next to her like they had as toddlers. "First," she said firmly, "you are brothers. Biology isn't what makes a family. Love, commitment, and choice do. Second, you are my sons. Anyone who questions that is showing their own ignorance, not our truth." But she knew this wasn't enough. They needed more than reassurance. They needed understanding and tools to navigate a world that sometimes struggled to accept families like theirs. "Tell me more about what happened," she encouraged, texting Sarah with her free hand. These conversations were better with multiple perspectives, and Sarah had become invaluable in helping the boys process racial issues. The incident at the mall, it turned out, was just the catalyst for feelings they'd been grappling with for months. As they grew more aware of social dynamics and racial identity, questions arose that couldn't be answered with simple reassurances. Sarah arrived as they were talking, adding her perspective as both a family member and a mother herself. "You know," she said, "when Mum first told us she was adopting you, I was worried about exactly these kinds of situations. I thought she couldn't possibly prepare you for the challenges you'd face." The twins looked up, surprised. Sarah rarely talked about her initial opposition to the adoption. "But watching you grow up, seeing how Mom made sure you were connected to your heritage while being secure in our family's love, I realized something important. She wasn't trying to shield you from these challenges. She was preparing you to face them with strength and understanding." Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand, grateful for how far they'd come. "Remember Keisha's classes?" she asked the boys. "Why did we start those when you were so young?" "To learn about our culture," Michael answered thoughtfully, "and to meet other black kids and families. To understand where we came from," James added, "even though we're part of this family." "Exactly," Margaret nodded. "Being my sons doesn't mean denying or ignoring your black identity. It means adding to who you are, not taking anything away." The conversation expanded over the following weeks. Margaret arranged for the family to attend workshops on transracial adoption and racial identity. The twins began spending more time at the community center, connecting with peers who shared their background while remaining secure in their family bonds. James incorporated more African American musical influences into his compositions, creating pieces that bridged classical and cultural traditions. Michael's science projects increasingly focused on solving problems affecting underserved communities, particularly those facing racial disparities. The family adapted too. Sarah organized regular cultural events that brought together their extended family with friends and mentors from the Black community. David incorporated more diverse perspectives into his teaching, often consulting his nephews for insight. Even Margaret's church, largely white when the adoption began, had become more inclusive through their family's influence. But perhaps the most significant growth came from the twins themselves. They began speaking at schools about their experience as part of a transracial family, helping other adopted children navigate similar challenges. Their unique perspective, being identical twins raised in a white family while maintaining strong connections to their Black heritage, offered open guidance to others in similar situations. "You know what's funny?" James said one evening after speaking at a local high school. "Those kids at the mall actually did us a favor. They made us think harder about who we are." Michael nodded. "We're Black, we're adopted, we're your sons, we're brothers. None of those things cancels out the others." Margaret watched her sons with pride, seeing how they'd transformed a moment of pain into a source of strength. They were becoming advocates not just for themselves, but for a broader understanding of what family could mean. "When people ask about our family now," James continued, "I tell them we're exactly who we're supposed to be." "And if they don't understand?" Margaret asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then that's their problem," Michael said simply. "We know who we are." The twins exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that had deepened over the years. They were entering their high school years not just as successful students or talented individuals, but as young men who understood and embraced all aspects of their identity. Their family hadn't just faced race. They had helped reshape how others saw it. One conversation, one performance, one science project at a time. The acceptance letters arrived on the same day, 2 thick envelopes that held dreams bigger than anyone had dared to imagine when this journey began. Margaret sat between her 17-year-old sons at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as they each held their respective futures. "Together?" James asked, looking at his brother. Michael nodded, and they opened their envelopes in perfect synchronization, a habit they'd never outgrown. The kitchen erupted in joyous chaos. James's early acceptance to Juilliard's prestigious piano program lay next to Michael's early admission letter from MIT's engineering department. Sarah, who had been recording the moment, let out a whoop of excitement that brought David running from the garden. "Full scholarships," Michael said quietly, his voice full of wonder. "Both of us." Margaret pulled her sons close, remembering the skeptics who had questioned her ability to provide for their future. The college funds James and Michael Jr. had helped establish had grown steadily. But these scholarships were the result of her boys' own hard work and extraordinary talents. James's journey to Juilliard had been paved with countless hours at the piano, his natural talent honed by dedication. His final audition piece, an original composition that blended classical structures with African rhythms, had left the admission panel speechless. The video had gone viral, catching the attention of major musical publications. "Teen prodigy redefines classical music," the headlines read. "Adopted twins' journey from foster care to Juilliard." But what made Margaret proudest was how James used his growing platform to advocate for arts education in underfunded schools. Michael's path to MIT was equally impressive. His solar energy project had evolved into a revolutionary design for affordable, efficient solar panels. He'd presented his research at national competitions, winning recognition not just for the science, but for his focus on making renewable energy accessible to disadvantaged communities. The news of their achievements spread quickly. Local media, which had followed their story over the years, requested interviews. National publications became interested in the broader implications of their success, what it said about adoption, about racial barriers, about the power of unconventional families. "Mrs. Wilson," one reporter asked during a family interview, "did you ever imagine when you adopted the twins at 70 that they would achieve so much?" Margaret smiled, watching. Her sons handled questions with the poise they'd developed through years of public speaking about their family. "I knew they were extraordinary from the first moment I met them," she answered. "All they needed was the chance to show everyone else." The twins' success began influencing adoption policies nationwide. Their story challenged assumptions about older adoptive parents and transracial adoption. Social workers started citing their case when advocating for keeping siblings together and considering non-traditional placements. But the most profound impact was closer to home. Their achievements had transformed not just their own lives, but their entire family's perspective on what was possible. Sarah had become a prominent advocate for adoption rights in her law practice. Michael Jr. established a medical scholarship for foster children. James's financial firm created a special fund for older adoptive parents. "You know what's amazing?" James said one evening as he practiced a piece for his upcoming Carnegie Hall debut, another dream no one had dared voice a decade ago. "Everything that made people doubt us, your age, our race, being adopted, those turned out to be our strengths." Michael looked up from his latest technical drawings. "It's like that theory I'm working on, how perceived obstacles can actually create unexpected advantages in system design." Margaret listened to her sons, marveling at how they'd grown into young men who could see the extraordinary in what others might consider limitations. At 87, she moved slower than she once had, but her mind remained sharp, her love for her boys stronger than ever. The acceptance letters sat prominently displayed on the mantel, alongside James's music awards and Michael's science medals. But more precious than any accolade were the family photos surrounding them. Images capturing their journey from uncertain beginnings to this moment of triumph. "Mama," Michael said, joining her as she looked at the photos, "we've been thinking. After college, we want to establish a foundation to help other families like ours, to show people that love doesn't have age limits or color barriers," James added, moving to her other side. Margaret wrapped an arm around each of her sons, these remarkable young men who had exceeded every expectation except her own. "You already have," she said softly. "You already have." The auditorium was packed for the twins' high school graduation, not just with family, though the Wilson clan occupied several rows, but with reporters, social workers, and families who had been touched by their story. Margaret sat in the front row, Sarah and David beside her, watching her sons take the stage as co-valedictorians. "10 years ago," James began, his voice carrying the same musical quality that had earned him his Juilliard scholarship, "everyone had an opinion about our family. They said we couldn't work," Michael continued, their practiced alternation drawing knowing smiles from the audience. "A 70-year-old white woman adopting 3-year-old black twins. It seemed impossible, but our mama taught us something important," James picked up. "She taught us that love doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about age," Michael added. "Or race," James continued. "Or what other people think is possible," they finished together, their speech wove together, their personal journey with a broader message about challenging societal norms. They talked about their upcoming speaking tour, where they would share their story at adoption conferences nationwide. They spoke about the research papers being written about their case, the policies being reconsidered, the doors being opened for other non-traditional families. But it was their direct address to Margaret that brought tears to every eye in the room. "Mama," James said, looking straight at her, "they said you were too old to be our mother, but you were exactly the right age," Michael continued. "You had 70 years of love stored up just waiting for us." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Margaret barely noticed, too busy holding onto Sarah's hand and dabbing at her eyes. Her boys, her beautiful boys, had grown into men who understood how to use their story to help others. The impact of their graduation speech rippled outward. Videos went viral on social media, catching the attention of national news networks. Interview requests poured in. Politicians began citing their case in debates about adoption reform. Universities wanted to study their family dynamics. The Wilson Family Foundation, established with the twins' college fund surplus and contributions from both boys' scholarships, began its work even before they left for college. Its mission was simple but powerful, supporting non-traditional adoptive families and advocating for keeping siblings together in the system. Margaret found herself speaking at social work conferences, her perspective as an older adoptive parent proving invaluable. Age brings patience, she would tell them. It brings wisdom, perspective, and the kind of love that's been tested by time. The Foundation's first initiative, named the Margaret Wilson Second Chapter Program, provided support for older adults looking to adopt. It offered financial guidance, medical support systems, and practical assistance. Sarah headed the legal team, ensuring that age alone would never again be a barrier to suitable adoptive parents. James and Michael's individual achievements continued to garner attention. James's Carnegie Hall debut was scheduled for the fall, while Michael's solar panel design was being considered for implementation in several developing countries. But they always found ways to connect their success back to their adoption story. "Our mama gave us roots and wings," James told one interviewer, "the roots of unconditional love and the wings to become whoever we were meant to be. She taught us that family is more than biology," Michael added. "It's about choice, commitment, and courage." The changes they inspired were both systemic and personal. Adoption agencies began actively recruiting older applicants. Support groups formed for transracial adoptive families. The Wilson family's journey became a case study in social work programs across the country, but perhaps their most meaningful legacy was the simple sight of Margaret at their graduation, surrounded by her entire family, biological and adopted, young and old, black and white, all celebrating together. They had become living proof that love could bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle, and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. After the ceremony, as cameras flashed and reporters waited for interviews, the twins found a quiet moment with their mother. "You did it, Mama," James said softly. "No," Margaret corrected, pulling them close. "We did it. All of us, together. And we're just getting started," Michael added, his eyes bright with plans for their foundation's future. Margaret looked at her sons, poised, confident, compassionate young men ready to take on the world, and knew that their greatest legacy would be the lives they would continue to change, the barriers they would break, and the love they would spread, just as she had taught them. On Margaret's 88th birthday, the Wilson house overflowed with celebration. James had flown in from his first semester at Juilliard, his fingers still thrumming with the pieces he was perfecting. Michael took a brief break from his groundbreaking research at MIT, his laptop never far away, as he monitored his latest solar energy trials. The gathering wasn't just a birthday celebration, it was a testament to how far they'd come. Sarah, once the strongest opponent of the adoption, now ran the legal department of their foundation. Her children had grown up seeing their uncles break barriers and challenge norms, making them passionate advocates for social justice in their own right. "Remember when you thought Mom was having a crisis?" David teased Sarah as they set up the party decorations. "Now look at us. We're all part of something bigger than we ever imagined." The twins, now 21, had grown into their roles as both leaders and bridge builders. James's music was revolutionizing the classical world, bringing diverse cultural influences to traditionally rigid spaces. Michael's renewable energy innovations were already being implemented in underserved communities, his commitment to accessibility as strong as his scientific brilliance. But more important than their individual achievements was how they'd transformed the meaning of family for countless others. The Wilson Family Foundation had helped facilitate over 100 non-traditional adoptions, with a special focus on keeping siblings together and supporting older adoptive parents. "Mama," James said during the party, sitting beside Margaret. At the piano he'd bought her last Christmas. Play our song. His professional musician's hands gently guided hers to the keys of the simple lullaby she'd sung to them in those early days. As Margaret played, her slightly arthritic fingers remembering the familiar melody, she looked around at her gathered family. The photographs on her walls told their story, from those first tentative days to this moment of triumph. Every doubt, every challenge, every victory had led them here. The legacy they'd built wasn't just in policies changed or barriers broken. It was in the love that filled this house, in the lives they'd touched, and in the future they'd helped create for families that didn't fit the traditional mold. Looking back on that day when she first walked into the Georgia foster home, Margaret could never have predicted how completely one decision would transform not just her life, but the lives of so many others. The quiet house she'd once thought would mark the end of her story had become just the beginning. James's music now filled concert halls worldwide, his compositions breaking down barriers between classical and contemporary, between cultures and traditions. Michael's sustainable energy solutions were bringing power to communities that had lived in darkness, his innovations earning him recognition as one of the youngest leaders in renewable technology. But their greatest achievement wasn't measured in awards or accolades. It was in the changes they'd inspired, the paths they'd opened for others. The Wilson Family Foundation had become a beacon of hope for non-traditional families, their story a testament to the power of love over convention. "You know what I tell people when they ask about our family," James said during one of their regular Sunday dinners. "I tell them that love doesn't see limitations, it sees possibilities." Michael nodded, adding, "And sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most unexpected beginnings." Margaret looked at her sons, her beautiful, brilliant sons, who had grown into men any mother would be proud of, and saw in them everything she had known was possible that first day. They had proven that family wasn't about age, race, or convention. It was about love, courage, and the willingness to believe in possibilities. Their legacy would live on in every non-traditional family that found hope in their story, in every policy changed, in every life touched by their foundation. They had shown the world that love, indeed, knows no bounds.